Well, welcome to my talk on foraging by bumblebees or bumblebee foraging. This is going to be a three-part talk, and we're going to look at, in this first part, why are bumblebees foraging, who is involved, in other words, what life stage, and when does it occur. Hi, I'm Dave Hobbins from Fort Kent, Maine, up in northern Maine. What you're looking at in this image is a brown-belted bumblebee, Bombus cruciacolus, that I photographed out in Galesburg, Illinois in June of 2023. So what is foraging? Basically, it's obtaining food. And what are they foraging for? Well, as you know, it's nectar and pollen. And the reason being is nectar gives them energy for flight and for metabolism. The pollen is loaded with proteins, fats, minerals, and vitamins are important in the growth of the larvae and also help the developing queen. So who is involved? There are actually 3 life stages, but you can see they're listed here as 4 things. But the queen, the workers, the drones, which are males, and the gynes, which are queens, but they're the queens that come out in the fall that will be carrying on the work the next year. So these are the future queens. In the image on the right, you can see the queen on the left. In the middle is a worker, and on the right is a drone or a male, and you can see they look a little scruffy in this species. This is, if I haven't said it, Bombus impatiens, the common eastern bumblebee. You'll see a few of them in this presentation. And here is a queen of Bombus impatiens in the spring. So the queens are feeding in the spring. This is when they emerge from the soil. So let's look at the next slide. So here you have early in the spring, there's dead grass, and you can just make out wild blueberry in the background. And the queens will come out of their dormancy, for lack of the right word, and they emerge in the spring. They're feeding on nectar for energy, and pollen will give them a little bit of boost for their ovary development. In the spring, when they emerge, there's very limited resources. Maybe there will be some non-native crocus, but one of the first things to flower will be willow. She is working all alone, all by herself. Many do not make it past this stage, and failure is quite possible, especially if you have cold, really cold weather, and she doesn't have enough resources. So if there's a lack of resources and cold, that combination is pretty deadly. The queen's job is to find a nest, and if she has found a nest, then she will start to collect pollen. If you see the queen early on, like in my first image, you notice she didn't have any pollen in her pollen basket. Once you see pollen in the pollen basket, you know she's found a nest and is starting to develop her colony. And she does that by creating a pollen clump or ball, and close by that she creates a wax and honey pot. She can produce wax on her abdomen, and she fills the honey pot with nectar, and she creates a pollen ball coated with nectar and saliva, and she'll use the nectar in the honey pot for her energy, and the honey pot will be storing so she can then lay eggs on the pollen ball and then incubate them while feeding on the nectar. So she is all by herself creating the colony. The next are going to be the workers, where most of the work on foraging has been done. And we will talk about workers and more on foraging, energy, and distances in the next 2 talks. But what they're doing is provisioning the nest with nectar and pollen when the queen is in there taking care of the young and laying eggs. So this we'll talk about in more detail in the next 2 talks. The other 2 involved are the drones, the males, and the gynes. The drones will be produced first, late summer, fall, followed by the gynes, late summer and fall. The males or the drones emerge, as I mentioned. and they are immediately, well, they spend a couple days in the colony, and then they'll go out looking for nectar, feeding, so they have energy for hunting and mating. So they need that flight energy so that they can hunt and chase after mates, and then also engage in mating. Later on, in about a month, I'm going to have a talk just on mating and talk more detail about this. The drones, here you can see an image. The drones, when they leave the nest, they do not go back into the nest. They are out there doing their job. Like I said, they'll only spend a couple of days. And then once they're out in the elements, here's a shot after a couple mild frost at the beginning of October. And you can see all these drones that have found their way to this sunflower, and they're kind of cluttered together, probably for warmth. A few of them are gone. A few are still moving, waiting for the sun to hit them and warm up. Okay, the gynns are the future queens. Again, they also emerge a little bit after the males, late summer and fall, and they are going to be consuming large quantities of pollen and nectar. They will come out to feed, and then will go back into the nest. Their job is to build up fat reserves in their fat body, so they can go into diapause. I have hibernation here, but the correct term is diapause. Hibernation is more of a term for mammals. When they're young, they're being fed probably about 3 times as much pollen as a worker larva. But then when they emerge as the adult, again, they will be in and out of the colony until they're mated and they have enough reserves, and then they'll go into their diapause underground. Okay, 2 main references that I'm using here are the Bumblebee textbook by Goulson from Oxford University Press. I recommend that. And there's a talk on YouTube that was put out by the Ohio State University Extension, where Dr. Jamie Strange was one of the speakers in the series. If you go to YouTube, search for Bumblebee Biology, I recommend this talk. He's a world expert in bumblebees. It's worth listening to. With that, I'll say thank you, and please join me in 2 weeks for part 2 on bumblebee foraging. See you then.